Tell me, what time did you finally close your eyes and fall asleep last night? Was it midnight? Maybe later? Or perhaps you couldn't sleep at all, your thoughts wandering in circles like shadows in the dark. If so, then tonight, you've come to the right place. I want to take you somewhere far from the noise of today, far from glowing screens and restless minds. Imagine yourself standing in the foggy fields of Sichuan, China. Beneath your feet lies an ancient secret, a city called Sanxingdui, a place forgotten for over 3,000 years. Buried beneath the soil were masks with eyes too wide, faces cast in gold, and a bronze tree stretching upward as if it wanted to touch the stars themselves. No one knows why this great city vanished. No one knows why its people destroyed their own treasures and left without a word. But some whisper that Sanxingdui was not just a city, it was a meeting place between humans and a higher power civilization that existed long before 1200 BCE. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, I'll tell you their story. A story of visitors from the sky, of forgotten fires above the mountains, and of the silence that still lingers over Sanxingdui. Let the mystery carry you gently into dreams, because sometimes the deepest secrets of the past are the ones that come alive in the quiet of night. Long before there were books or scrolls, before kings wrote their names on tablets of clay or carved their power into stone, there were only voices, voices carried by wind, whispers by firelight, and stories scratched into the bones of memory. When we look far back into that deep, deep time, so far that the world feels almost like another planet, we see not cities and empires, but small bands of people, wandering, surviving, learning. They were not yet the humans we are today. They were something older, something half-remembered in our own bodies. They were Homo erectus, the upright ones, who had learned to stand tall, but had not yet dreamed of Sanxingdui, or golden masks, or the strange gods of the Shu kingdom. And yet, even in that faraway dawn, there are hints, scattered like ashes after a fire, that perhaps they were not entirely alone. Homo erectus walked the forests and river valleys of what we now call Sichuan. The land was green, heavy with mist, full of rivers that coiled like serpents. They learned to use stones to spark fire, to gather together against beasts much stronger than they were. But in their myths, the ones passed in gestures and simple sounds, the ones that later generations remembered and shaped into fuller tales, there were visitors, shapes that did not belong to the wild beasts of the valleys. Eyes that glowed brighter than fire, faces that seemed too tall, too sharp, too shining. It is easy, of course, to dismiss such whispers as imagination, but imagination itself is evidence. The dreams of Homo erectus did not appear from nothing. They were stirred, just as embers are stirred when wind rushes through a fire. The people would gather around flames at night, and sometimes one would point to the sky. Perhaps they saw meteors or comets, or just the wild scattering of stars. But in their gestures, in the tilt of their heads, you can almost see them remembering, as if something once descended from above, long ago, leaving behind the echo of awe. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo erectus survived, and in their survival they laid the bones of future humanity. Yet what is most curious is not just their tools or their bones, but their eyes. Archaeologists who look into the fossil skulls sometimes remark on how the eye sockets are wide, how the faces are strong, how the presence of these beings seems both familiar and alien. Were they just hunters on the plains? Or were they the first to be touched by something greater? The land of Sichuan, in particular, holds secrets. The soil has always been generous, growing rice, bamboo, fruit, and herbs. The rivers have always been restless, flooding and twisting, yet nourishing. And the mountains stand like guardians, closing the basin off from the outside world. It is a perfect cradle for a hidden story. In this cradle, Homo erectus lived, dreamed, and perhaps, just perhaps, met something that was not entirely of this earth. Imagine them, huddled in caves during a storm. The rain lashes the trees, the lightning cracks the sky. Suddenly the storm parts and a glow, brighter than fire, hovers above the valley. To them, it would have been unspeakable. No words, no sounds could capture it. They would have only pointed, wide-eyed, their hearts pounding with terror and wonder. Was it just lightning playing tricks, or was it something greater, a visitation from a civilization beyond their own comprehension? Those who believe in lost histories, in higher powers that came before recorded time, say that this was the beginning, that Homo erectus, left to themselves, would have taken a slower path. But with guidance, with whispers of knowledge, they were nudged. Fire became not just survival, but ritual. Stone became not just tool, but symbol. And memory became not just instinct, but story. The earliest memory of the Shu kingdom, the later people of Sanxingdui, begins here, in the blurred, forgotten days of Homo erectus. They were the ones who first stared at the strange eyes of visitors. They were the ones who first saw shapes that were not beast and not man. Perhaps this is why thousands of years later their descendants would carve masks with bulging eyes and solemn mouths, trying to remember those first encounters. But how do we trace such shadows? After all, fossils cannot tell us dreams. Bones do not record visions. And yet in the soil of Sichuan, archaeologists have found signs of fire pits from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Charred bones, carefully broken, not by accident but by design. Tools shaped not just to cut but to make patterns. Could these be the faintest fingerprints of guidance? Legends say that the first king of Shu, Kangkong, had protruding eyes so strange that people whispered he could see beyond the mortal world. Why would a people remember eyes in such a way unless the memory was very old, passed from ancestor to ancestor, until it became the defining mark of their kings and gods? Could it be that Homo erectus themselves first encountered beings with such eyes and never forgot? Now picture this, a small band of erectus huddled near the riverbank. Night is falling. They have gathered food, hunted small animals, cracked bones for marrow. Fire flickers at the center. Suddenly a shape appears from the trees. Not a beast, not one of their own. Taller, stranger, covered in something that gleams faintly. Eyes that shine in the firelight, too large, too knowing. The group freezes, their breaths catch, and slowly, reverently, one of them places an offering, a piece of meat, a shard of stone, at the stranger's feet. The stranger does not eat, does not take the stone. Instead, perhaps the stranger gestures upward, to the stars, to the sky, to a place beyond. And then, as silently as they came, the stranger leaves. That memory, that single event, could have been enough to spark centuries of worship, of fear, of story. And once such a memory takes root, it never fully dies. It passes down, transformed, reshaped, but always there. When we think of Sanxingdui thousands of years later, with its enormous bronze masks and golden ornaments, we see the echo of this. For what are masks if not attempts to capture faces that are not quite human? What are trees of bronze if not attempts to recreate ladders that once touched the sky? And so part one of this long tale belongs to the forgotten ones, the ones who stood upright first, who dreamed first, who saw something they could never explain. They are not usually given credit for the birth of civilization, but perhaps they should be. Perhaps Homo erectus was not simply a beginning stage of humanity, but the very first witnesses of the higher power civilization that would one day shape Sanxingdui. The rivers of Sichuan still flow today. The mist still curls around the mountains. And somewhere deep in the soil, beneath layers of history and silence, the bones of Homo erectus still rest. They cannot speak. And yet, if you listen closely, in the rustle of the bamboo, in the rush of the rivers, in the strange glow of lightning on a stormy night, you might just hear their whispers. Whispers of fire in the sky. Whispers of faces too large, too golden, too strange to be forgotten. Whispers that seeded the kingdom to come. This is where the story begins, not with kings or empires, not with bronze or gold, but with the upright ones, the forgotten ones, standing under the vast sky, staring with wide eyes and knowing deep in their bones that they were not alone. The memory of the first encounter did not vanish. It clung like smoke to the minds of those early people, carried in grunts, in gestures, in the way eyes widened at the mention of lights in the night. Homo erectus could not carve words into stone, nor write symbols on clay, but they remembered in the only way they could, through imitation, through ritual, through watching the skies. And when the children asked why fire came from the heavens, why thunder shook the earth, the elders pointed upward and tried to explain with sounds that were half fear and half reverence. Somewhere along the endless span of generations, those encounters began to take shape as myth. The upright ones had seen figures that glowed like flame, yet walked like men. They had seen masks of gold, eyes that shone too wide, too knowing. These figures became the visitors of the dawn, the ones who came when the sky cracked open. As the earth turned and ages passed, Homo erectus gave way to later humans. Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Homo sapiens, all left their marks. But here in Sichuan, the story did not break. It stretched like a thin thread carried from ancestor to descendant. By the time the Shu tribes formed, that thread had become legend. Their first kings were not ordinary men, but those touched by the visitors. It is easy now to dismiss these legends as mere invention. But when we look at the relics of Sanxingdui, unearthed thousands of years later, we cannot help but notice the same themes repeated. The masks with the large eyes. Why eyes, of all things? Why so wide, so unnatural? What memory could last that long, if not the memory of seeing something profoundly unlike themselves? The people of the valley began to build more than fires. They began to shape clay, to mold figures, to bury treasures with reverence. The visitors, whether they still came or whether they had long since departed, had left behind an expectation that humanity was not alone, that the sky held powers greater than the earth. And so, when a bright star fell, when comets flashed, when strange lights appeared above the mountains, the people saw not random nature, but the return of those who had once walked among them. Let us imagine them again, these early Shu ancestors. The valley is heavy with mist. The river glimmers with moonlight. A group gathers near the shore, their faces painted with ash, their bodies wrapped in animal skins. They lift their heads, waiting. For nights, they have seen a strange fire in the sky, moving unlike the stars, not fading as quickly as a meteor. Tonight, it hovers again, brighter than ever. The people kneel, placing carved stones and bits of jade before them. The fire flickers, hums, and then, as though answering their offerings, it drifts silently over the river. The elders whisper to the children, "These are the ones who taught our ancestors to stand, to strike stones for fire, to look beyond the beasts." The children listen, eyes wide, and the memory embeds itself again. Was it truly sky beings, or was it simply the imagination of a people in awe of the heavens? The line between myth and history is thin, like mist before dawn. But what matters is not the certainty. What matters is the persistence. For the story did not die. Over time, the Shu tribes grew. Villages clustered along rivers, food became abundant, rituals more elaborate. They built shrines not only to animals and ancestors, but to the visitors. They carved wooden masks, tall and fierce, mimicking the glowing faces they believed still watched over them. And in these rituals, something curious happened. Power shifted. Certain men and women, those who claimed descent from the sky beings, began to lead. They were said to carry the gift of vision, the ability to see beyond the ordinary. This is where Kangkong enters the myth, the first king of Shu, the one with protruding eyes. The people followed him not just because he commanded armies or built walls, but because they believed his eyes were proof. Proof that he carried the blood of the visitors. Proof that the connection had not been broken. Why eyes? Why always the eyes? Because eyes are windows. Eyes see, and in seeing, they remember. Perhaps Kangkong's face was indeed unusual, genetic, inherited, shaped by ancient ancestry. Or perhaps it was only story, a tale woven to justify power. But the people believed, and belief is the strongest mortar in building kingdoms. The Shu kingdom rose. Fields spread across the basin. Canals guided the rivers. Walls encircled settlements. Bronze began to flow from their furnaces, shaped into tools and treasures. And in those bronzes we see the legacy of the visitors. Masks with wide eyes, faces plated in gold, statues taller than men, with features that are not quite human. These were not decorations. They were attempts to capture the memory of the dawn visitors, to freeze in metal what their ancestors had once seen in flesh. And what of the bronze tree? That strange, towering artifact uncovered centuries later, with branches curling like the coils of the sky, with birds perched like guardians. The people said it was the axis between worlds, a bridge connecting heaven and earth. But perhaps it was something else, a model, a memory of the machines that descended like trees of fire, roots in the earth, branches stretching upward. Perhaps what the Shu people remembered was not a symbolic tree at all, but the very shape of the crafts their ancestors had seen. The more we look, the more the relics of Sanxingdui seem to tell the same story. that the Shu kingdom was not merely an invention of human hands, but the continuation of a contact older than memory. Homo erectus saw the visitors first. The early tribes remembered. The Shu kings claimed descent, and the bronze masks became the frozen testimony of a belief that refused to die. But belief is never simple, it comes with fear. If the visitors could give, they could also take away. And so the people began not just to honor them, but to appease them. Sacrifices grew larger, rituals more elaborate. They buried jade, ivory, gold, as if hoping the treasures would lure the visitors back. They broke and burned offerings, as if destruction itself was a language the sky could understand. Imagine the pits filling with smoke, the priests chanting, the masks gleaming in firelight. All of it done with one thought in mind: do not leave us. Return. Guide us again. The visitors of the dawn, whether real or imagined, had become inseparable from the Shu identity. To question them was to question the very foundation of the kingdom. And so the story grew, layer upon layer, until it was no longer just a memory, it was truth. And yet, even truth can tremble. For behind every ritual is a shadow of doubt. The people wondered, had the visitors abandoned them? Were the gods angry? Would they ever return? The visitors of the dawn were no longer simply figures in the mist. They were now the silent judges above, their absence as heavy as their presence once had been. And in that silence, the Shu kingdom grew restless. But for now, in this part of the story, let us linger with the awe. Let us picture the valley before the great collapse, before the fires of sacrifice consumed the treasures. Let us picture the people looking upward, whispering the names of the dawn visitors, building their lives in the shadow of memory. Because it is here, in this mixture of fear and devotion, that Sanxingdui's greatness was born. The mist never truly left the basin. Even as the tribes grew into villages and the villages into towns, even as the people learned to shape bronze and raise walls of packed earth, the air of Sichuan remained veiled, heavy, almost protective. Outsiders found the mountains hard to cross, the rivers too fierce, the fog too thick. And so within that cradle the Shu kingdom rose, sheltered yet touched by something beyond itself, like a child, hidden yet marked by destiny. The Shu people traced their line to Kangkong, the first king, whose eyes were said to bulge outward, strange and luminous, forever watching more than the human world. To outsiders, it might have been a deformity, a quirk of birth. But to the Shu, it was proof that their ruler's blood was not wholly of this earth, proof that the visitors of the dawn had chosen their line to guide humanity. And when Kangkong's descendants ruled, their authority rested not on mere might, but on this belief that they were living bridges between sky and soil. Imagine standing in the capital of this kingdom, which later generations would call Sanxingdui. The city did not sprawl like later Chinese capitals. It crouched within walls of rammed earth, thick as cliffs encircling homes, workshops, and shrines. The air rang with the sound of bronze being cast, liquid metal hissing as it met clay molds, sparks flying like tiny suns. Artisans worked with reverence. For every mask, every vessel was more than craft. It was a connection. They were not simply shaping metal, they were shaping memory, binding the present to the visitors of old. The masks grew larger and larger, some wider than a man's outstretched arms. Their eyes bulged impossibly, their ears spread like wings. Some were plated with gold, shining even in the dim mist. They were not meant to be worn by mortals. They were too vast, too heavy, too alien. They were meant for gods, or at least for humans, to remember gods by. Each time a mask was cast, it was as though the people whispered to the sky, "We remember, we have not forgotten. Do not forget us in return." But it was not only masks. The shoe-shaped figures of standing men, tall and solemn, their hands extended as if offering or holding unseen gifts. Some say they once held elephant tusks, others say they grasped jade. Still others imagine they bore rods of power, gifts from the sky. Whatever the truth, their stance was unmistakable. They were mediators, priests, or perhaps even kings, channeling the power of the visitors through ceremony. The bronze tree, too, rose in the city, assembled branch by branch, curling upward in a spiral that seemed less like plant and more like machinery disguised as nature. Its birds perched like guardians, its blossoms curling like flames. Around its base, offerings piled high, jade discs carved with holes, ivory from elephants that did not belong to Sichuan's valleys, seashells carried from distant shores. How did such objects arrive in a land ringed by mountains? The people believed the tree called them, that the visitors opened paths no human feet could find. The kingdom thrived. The rivers fed fields of millet and rice, the artisans worked bronze and gold, the priests guarded the rituals. And always, above it all, the memory of the visitors lingered. The kings spoke as though their right to rule came not from war or blood alone, but from inheritance of vision. Their eyes, their sight, their connection was what set them apart. And the people who lived in the shadow of masks too huge to wear believed. Yet within this glory a shadow deepened. For belief is never pure. It carries fear, and fear demands proof. Each year, when floods struck or droughts lingered, when disease swept or enemies pressed near, the question arose, why do the visitors not return? The kings promised they still watched. The priests declared the rituals must continue, must grow stronger. And so sacrifices became heavier. Animals were not enough. Treasures, tusks, jades, gold, all were piled and burned, shattered and buried. It was as if the people were speaking louder and louder into a silent sky, hoping someone, somewhere, would answer. Still, the city shone. Traders whispered of Sanxingdui's splendor, of its strange customs and towering masks. Neighbors spoke with awe of the Shu Kingdom's kings, and yet outsiders rarely entered. The basin remained its own world, fog-wrapped, river-guarded, almost untouched by the dynasties rising elsewhere in China. Some have wondered if this isolation was deliberate, if the Shu people were guarding something not meant to spread. Others believe the visitors themselves had drawn a veil, keeping the basin apart as a sanctuary. Whatever the truth, the Shu kingdom lived as though balanced on two planes. One foot in the earth, in farming and trade and craft, the other foot in the sky, in memory and myth and longing. It is perhaps this tension that gave their art such power. For when we gaze today at the golden scepter, the bronze masks, the vast tree, we do not see simple decoration. We see yearning, yearning made metal. We see a people who had touched something greater and refused to let it go. The king walked through his city, eyes always heavy, face solemn. Behind him trailed priests in robes, artisans with bronze-stained hands, warriors with spears tipped in obsidian. Before him stood masks so large they seemed like walls, silent faces staring with eternal patience. The king lifted his hand, and the people bowed, not just to him, but to what he represented. The last tether to the visitors of the dawn. Generations passed, kings succeeded kings, and the rituals deepened. The Shu kingdom was no longer a fragile sprout of tribes. It was a power, a culture distinct and strong, thriving in its mist-bound valley. And yet the question never ceased. Would the visitors return in body, not just in memory? Would the sky crack open once more, and would those glowing-eyed beings walk again among men? The priests promised yes. The masks, they said, were beacons. The bronze tree was a ladder. The offerings were keys. One day the gates would open again. But in the silence between their promises, unease grew. And unease is a seed that waits for storm. Still in this chapter of the story, let us hold to the glory. Let us picture Sanxingdui at its height, shining in bronze and gold, ringing with the sound of casting furnaces, the river markets bustling, the walls strong, the shrines heavy with incense. A kingdom proud, mysterious, veiled in mist, yet burning with belief. Because before the fall, before the fire and the pits, Sanxingdui stood tall, a place where earth and sky once touched, and where humanity, for a time, believed itself closer than ever to the stars. The heart of the Shu kingdom pulsed not only with the clang of bronze and the murmur of rivers, but with something stranger, something that seemed to lean out of the everyday and brush against the eternal. At the center of this mystery stood the tree, bronze, impossible, vast. It did not grow from soil or sun, but from fire and furnace, molded by hands guided, some say, by memory older than the kingdom itself. The bronze tree of Sanxingdui was no mere ornament. Its branches curled upward in spirals, reaching for heaven, while birds perched among its leaves, their beaks sharp, their wings stiff yet purposeful, as if waiting for a signal to fly. Its trunk was thick, steady, rooted not in earth but in faith. The people said it was the axis of the worlds, a bridge between sky and soil, a reminder of what had once touched their ancestors. Archaeologists thousands of years later would puzzle over it, piecing its broken fragments together like shards of a dream. But to the Shu it was never broken. It stood whole, towering above offerings of jade, ivory, and gold, its shadow stretching over the misty courtyards of Sanxingdui. To them, the tree was alive, though not in the way ordinary trees are alive. It breathed not with sap, but with memory. It grew not leaves, but possibilities. The priests tended it carefully. They approached it with painted faces, carrying torches of resinous pine, their chants echoing against the city walls. They circled the tree, pouring libations of wine and blood, placing treasures at its roots. Each ritual was a conversation, a way of speaking upward, hoping the sky would listen. The people gathered, kneeling, watching the branches shimmer in firelight. And in the hush between chants, some swore the birds tilted their heads, as if hearing something no human ear could catch. The tree was not just symbol, it was memory made metal. Generations whispered that it had been built to mirror something their ancestors had once seen, something not born of this earth. They said long ago, when Homo erectus still wandered the valleys, a great tree of fire had descended from the heavens, roots glowing, branches blazing, touching the ground for only a short while. From it emerged the visitors with eyes too bright, faces too strange. When they left, the memory of their tree remained, and so centuries later the Shu people shaped it in bronze, a way of keeping alive what they dared not forget. But why bronze? Why pour so much labor into a tree that could never sway in wind, never sprout blossoms, never give fruit? Because bronze was the language the Shu knew best, the element they believed could withstand time, fire, and the gaze of gods. Bronze was their stone, their scripture, their voice cast into eternity. If wood rotted, bronze endured. If memory faded, bronze remembered. The king himself would stand before the tree during great festivals, his robes embroidered with golden suns and river patterns, his eyes shadowed by heavy lids. He lifted his hands toward the highest branch. He would speak words the people did not dare repeat, words said to have been passed down from the visitors themselves, syllables shaped not by human throats but by echoes of sky. And when he finished, silence fell. The crowd waited, trembling, for some sign. Sometimes a breeze stirred, sometimes a bird cried in the distance, and sometimes, though perhaps it was only imagination, the tree seemed to hum, faint and metallic, as if vibrating with a power that did not belong wholly to earth. It is easy now to call it myth. Easy to say the tree was no more than art, no more than symbol. Yet symbols themselves hold power. Why shape a tree and not a mountain? Why birds and not beasts? Why branches curling like flames instead of straight trunks? The answer, perhaps, lies in memory. The Shu were not inventing, they were remembering. And memory, when cast in bronze, becomes more than story. It becomes testimony. Around the tree other rituals grew, processions with drums and horns, masks carried high on poles, dancers with arms raised like branches, their eyes painted wide. The whole city seemed to move like a forest in wind, swaying, reaching, echoing the shape of the bronze tree. And in the nights of fire, when torches flickered and shadows leapt, the city became a mirror of heaven, a grove of humans imitating gods. But with reverence came fear. The priests warned that the tree was not only a bridge upward, but a ladder downward. Just as humans could call to the sky, so too could the sky send down judgment. The branches were doors, they said, and doors open both ways. Offerings must be made, or else what descended would not be blessing but wrath. And so the sacrifices grew heavier, the fires larger, the pits deeper. The tree demanded much, or so the priests insisted. Some nights, strange lights moved across the valley sky. The people gathered at the tree, whispering that the visitors were near. The priests lifted their arms, faces painted gold, shouting into the mist, "We are ready. We remember. Do not pass us by." But the lights never landed. They flickered, drifted, vanished. Silence returned, and the people, disappointed but still believing, piled more offerings at the roots. The artisans who shaped the tree told their apprentices that each curl, each bird, each branch followed a pattern older than themselves. They said the design came from dreams, visions that struck in the night, guiding their hands as if another power shaped the bronze through them. Was it imagination, or memory carried in the blood? passed down from those first ancestors who had once seen the fiery tree of the visitors? No one could say. But the artisans did not doubt. They cast and hammered with devotion, convinced that every curve of the tree was exact, necessary, demanded by powers beyond their sight. The bronze tree became the center not just of the city but of the kingdom's identity. Outsiders who glimpsed it whispered in awe, carrying rumors back beyond the mountains. They spoke of a kingdom that worshipped a metal tree, that piled treasures at its feet, that cast masks so vast they seemed made for giants. And though the outsiders could not understand, the Shu themselves felt no need to explain. To them, the tree was not madness, it was memory. But memory can become burden. Each ritual, each sacrifice, each hope placed upon the bronze tree was also a reminder the visitors had not returned. The ladder stood waiting, but no one descended. The bridge was ready, but no footsteps crossed. The silence grew heavier, the offerings became desperate, and beneath the glory of the tree a shadow stretched. Still, in those days before the collapse, the tree glimmered in the firelight, the masks watched with their wide eyes, the king prayed with his heavy lids, and the people believed. They believed the tree was a promise that one day the sky would open again, and the visitors of the dawn would return to walk among them. And so the bronze tree stood, tall and silent, its branches reaching higher than any roof, its birds waiting forever to take flight. A symbol, a memory, a testimony. Whether it was dream or truth, it shaped a kingdom. And even now, buried for millennia, shattered and hidden, when its fragments were unearthed and pieced together, its presence still hummed, as if some part of it still remembered, as if the tree itself had never forgotten the visitors of the dawn. The bronze tree stood, shimmering in the firelight, but around it the air began to thicken with unease. The kingdom had flourished for generations, its bronze masks staring out with eternal eyes, its river valleys swelling with harvests, its people convinced that their bond with the sky remained unbroken. Yet something changed. The signs began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like shadows creeping across a wall at dusk. But soon the shadows lengthened, and no one could ignore them. First came the droughts. The great river that had always given life to the valley thinned, its surface cracked with sandbars. The fishermen hauled up empty nets, their boats drifting aimless in the sluggish current. Farmers knelt in their fields, pressing seeds into dry soil, only to watch them wither beneath a pitiless sun. The king's granaries echoed with hollow emptiness. Hunger, once a stranger in Sanxingdui, crept in like a thief. Then came the floods. The rain, absent for seasons, returned all at once as if the heavens had broken open in fury. Torrents carved through villages, uprooted trees, swept away shrines and homes. The carefully built canals overflowed, drowning fields that had only just begun to recover. The river, once the kingdom's lifeline, now turned on its people, roaring with rage. And then came the trembling. The earth itself shook, groaning beneath their feet, splitting roads, toppling walls, cracking the very foundations of temples. Statues fell, masks shattered, and sometimes in the dead of night the people swore they heard the bronze tree itself quiver with a low metallic hum, as if straining to hold its place in the trembling soil. The people whispered, the gods were angry. The priests listened to the wind, watched the skies, studied the trembling of the earth, and confirmed what the people already feared. The visitors had turned their faces away, the bronze tree had been neglected, the offerings were not enough. Something deeper was demanded, and so the sacrifices began. At first, they offered jade, smooth, cool, luminous stone, shaped into blades, rings, and figures. They placed them at the roots of the tree, believing that the beauty of jade, incorruptible and eternal, might please the sky once more. When the tremors did not cease, they brought ivory, tusks carved with spirals and suns, taken from elephants that wandered distant forests. When still the rains lashed and the earth moaned, they brought gold, hammered into thin sheets, shining like captured sunlight. But the disasters did not stop. The priests grew more desperate. They declared that the offerings must not only be given but broken. The gods demanded destruction, proof that the Shu people were willing to tear from themselves what was most precious, to shatter their own wealth in hope of divine mercy. And so pits were dug, vast and deep, into the soft earth of the city. Into them treasures were piled high, masks, vessels, jades, tusks, gold. And then, with torches, the priests set them alight. The fire raged, licking bronze until it glowed red, cracking jade, blackening ivory, melting gold into molten streams. Smoke poured upward, thick and bitter, curling around the branches of the bronze tree. The people knelt, weeping, as if their own flesh burned in the pits. The priests raised their arms, voices hoarse, chanting to the unseen sky. The pits became rivers of fire, glowing so fiercely that even the night seemed to back away. And when the flames finally died, the pits were filled with ash, shards, and twisted remains of treasures that had once gleamed in sunlight. The priests covered them with soil, whispering prayers, sealing them away as if burying the kingdom's own heart. But still the disasters did not stop. Some began to whisper that the visitors were not angry, they were gone. That no offering, no sacrifice, no burning could bring them back. The bronze tree, once a bridge, now stood like an abandoned gate, a door locked forever. The priests silenced such whispers quickly, calling them heresy. They insisted the gods still listened, that more must be given, more must be burned, more must be buried. So the pits multiplied. What began as one grew into many. Each new disaster brought a new pit, each new tremor a new fire. Masks with bulging eyes, once revered as sacred, were tossed into the flames, their wide stares cracking, their golden skins warping. Vessels shaped like dragons and tigers were smashed, their fragments scattered among the ashes. The people obeyed, but with each offering their hearts grew heavier, and darker whispers spread. Some said it was not just treasures the gods demanded, but life. That the pits, once filled with bronze and jade, would soon hunger for blood. The priests, draped in gold and painted with ash, neither confirmed nor denied. Their silence was answer enough. The people began to fear the priests as much as the disasters, for in their painted eyes they saw not comfort, but hunger, a desperation so sharp it cut through the rituals. The priests were no longer mediators, they had become keepers of terror, guardians of the burning pits. One night, when the moon hung low and red, strange lights flickered above the valley. The people gathered, hoping at last for the return of the visitors. But the lights did not descend. They wavered, quivered, and then vanished into the mountains. The priests declared the gods had looked upon them and found them still unworthy. The people, sobbing, returned to their homes, knowing more treasures would soon burn. The city that had once flourished with bronze and song grew quiet. Its streets smelled of ash, its fields of mud. The masks, once gleaming, were blackened with soot. The bronze tree, though still standing, seemed to darken in the smoke, its branches heavy with silence. The people no longer saw it as a bridge, but as a reminder of their failure, a towering witness to their unanswered prayers. And yet the pits grew, deeper, wider, filled with more and more until the earth itself seemed to swallow the kingdom's soul. Even now, when archaeologists unearthed them thousands of years later, they would marvel at the scale, the wealth buried, the treasures destroyed. They would wonder, what madness drove a people to burn their own glory? What fear compelled them to bury their greatest creations? The answer is written not in words, but in ash, in the silence between disasters, in the shadows that crept across the valley. Perhaps the visitors had never been gods at all. Perhaps they were something else, something that came, offered glimpses of knowledge, and then departed, leaving humans to long for their return. Perhaps the Shu, in their devotion, mistook absence for anger, silence for judgment. And so they burned their treasures, buried their wealth, poured their hope into the earth, waiting for a reply that never came. The pits became graves of faith. Each mask, each vessel, each shard was not only art, but a cry into the void. Do not forget us. Do not abandon us. But the void remained silent. The people kept burning, kept burying, until the city itself seemed to wither. What had once been a kingdom of bronze and brilliance became a place of smoke and silence. The visitors did not return, the disasters did not cease, and in the growing emptiness the people of Sanxingdui began to fade, their glory swallowed by the very pits they had dug. And still beneath the soil the treasures slept, broken and burned, waiting for the day when strangers from distant centuries would uncover them. Waiting for the day when new eyes would stare into the pits and wonder what power once touched this place, what fear drove a kingdom to sacrifice its own heart. The shadows had grown long, the pits had been filled, and Sanxingdui, once radiant, now stood on the edge of disappearance. The kingdom of Sanxingdui had once burned like a star, its brilliance unmatched, its treasures gleaming with a strange, otherworldly power. Yet stars, no matter how bright, are born to fade. And in the slow turning of the centuries, the fire that had lit the Shu kingdom began to gutter. No one could say precisely when the decline began, for collapse is never sudden. It creeps, it whispers, it gnaws at the edges before swallowing the whole. But by the time the people of Sanxingdui realized, their world was already unraveling. The pits of fire and sacrifice had drained the kingdom's wealth. The fields, once lush and fertile, now yielded little more than bitterness. The river that had given them life seemed to withhold its blessing, flooding and drying in cruel cycles. The mountains shook with tremors. The air hung heavy with smoke and silence. What had been offerings to the gods now seemed like wounds carved into the land, bleeding the city of its strength. And yet perhaps the greatest loss was not in treasure or harvest, but in faith. The bronze tree, towering and immutable, once stood as the axis of their world. Now it loomed like a monument to absence, its branches reaching for a sky that no longer answered. The people began to avoid its shadow, glancing at it with unease, as though the very metal had grown hungry, absorbing their unanswered prayers. The priests shouted louder, demanded more, painted their faces with thicker gold, burned larger offerings. But the silence stretched, and the people began to wonder if the priests themselves had lost their way. Some whispered that the priests had invented the rituals to hide their failure, that the visitors had never promised to return. Others said the visitors were not gods but tricksters, deceiving the Shu into worshipping shadows. And still others whispered something darker, that the visitors had never left, but watched from hidden places, amused by human desperation. Fear fractured into doubt, and doubt fractured into anger. Some families gathered their belongings and fled, following the river into the mountains, seeking new lands, new beginnings. They carried with them fragments of the old faith, small jades, bronze charms, masks of clay pressed into children's hands. They whispered the old stories at night, but their voices grew faint with distance. To the lands beyond the mountains they would later be known as strangers who arrived with tales of a vanished kingdom, speaking of golden eyes and burning pits. Others stayed, unwilling to abandon the land of their ancestors. They clung to the rituals, clung to the hope that one day the sky would open and the visitors would descend. But even the most faithful felt their hope cracking. When the priests declared a final, immense offering, a sacrifice greater than all those before, many obeyed, not out of belief, but out of fear. For what else was left? And so the greatest pits were dug. Into them went treasures so vast that later ages would never comprehend the loss. Whole caches of masks, bronzes taller than men, tusks, jades, gold, all broken, all burned, all buried. The fires that raged over those pits lit the valley for nights on end, casting the city in an eerie glow. People wept as the treasures melted and cracked, as if the very soul of Sanxingdui was being consumed before their eyes. When the fires died and the pits were sealed, silence returned. The priests waited, the king waited, the people waited, but nothing came. The visitors did not return. The disasters did not cease, and so Sanxingdui, once the radiant kingdom of the Shu, began to empty. Families vanished into the mountains, villages fell silent. The walls, once strong, grew brittle. The workshops where artisans hammered bronze fell quiet, their forges dark. The great courtyards where festivals had thundered with drums now echoed only with wind. And then, as suddenly as it had risen, the kingdom of Sanxingdui was gone. Not conquered by armies, not toppled by kings, but swallowed by silence. When later generations came to the valley, they found ruins and fragments, broken walls, buried pits, scattered bronzes, masks staring upward with eyes that no longer glowed. They asked what had happened, but no answer came. The earth had swallowed the story whole, sealing it in ash and bronze. Yet not everything vanished. To the west, in Jinsha, echoes appeared. A new settlement rose, carrying traces of Sanxingdui's glory. The bronzes were smaller, the rituals quieter, the masks less grand, but the memory lingered. Survivors had carried it, refusing to let the fire of their ancestors die completely. They told stories of a kingdom that had once touched the sky, of gods with bulging eyes, of treasures burned to please powers that never answered. In time, even Jinsha would fade. But the memory could not be extinguished. Memory does not die, it burrows. It hides in soil, in story, in silence. It waits. Thousands of years later, when the pits were uncovered, when archaeologists brushed away the dirt to reveal masks and tusks and trees of bronze, the silence broke. The treasures spoke again, not in words, but in presence. They stared with eyes as wide as when they had been cast, as if still waiting, still remembering, still asking, "Do you see us now? Do you remember?" And as the modern world gazed upon them, questions flooded back. Why were they burned? Why were they buried? Why did the kingdom vanish so suddenly? What power had once walked among them? The truth lay scattered in fragments, half buried, half remembered. To some the answer was clear. The disasters had broken the kingdom. To others, the priests had led them astray. But to those who listened closer, who leaned into the silence, another possibility stirred, that the visitors had come, that they had touched Homo erectus long before, had guided the shoe into greatness, and then had left, leaving only silence, leaving only masks that stared into nothing. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of Sanxingdui was not its collapse, but its hope. Hope that the visitors would return. Hope that silence could be broken. Hope that the bronze tree was not merely a monument, but a promise. When hope is betrayed, what remains but ash? Yet even in collapse, something endured. The masks, the bronzes, the pits, they were buried not to be forgotten but to be remembered. The priests may have demanded sacrifice, the people may have wept in despair, but in their act of burial they ensured the kingdom's story would survive. That one day, when the soil was peeled back, the eyes of Sanxingdui would open once more. So the vanishing kingdom did not vanish completely. It sank into earth and myth, into rumor and silence, but it waited. And in waiting, it endured. Perhaps that was the final lesson of Sanxingdui, not that gods abandoned them, not that disaster consumed them, but that memory itself is a form of survival, that even when kingdoms burn and fade, the story remains, carried by soil, by stone, by bronze, and that one day the story will rise again to remind us that long before we thought ourselves alone, there were others, and so the kingdom disappeared, but its eyes still stare, its tree still reaches, its silence still hums. Sanxingdui lives, not in walls or kings, but in memory. The vanishing kingdom had fallen, but its mystery had only just begun. Long after the people of Sanxingdui had vanished into the folds of time, their city left to sleep beneath soil and silence, the earth still carried secrets. Secrets that were older than the kingdom, older than bronze, older even than the shoe people themselves. For beneath the broken walls and buried pits, under the masks and tusks and shattered treasures, there lay bones. Bones of those who had walked the same valleys long before Sanxingdui had risen. Bones of beings who were human, and yet not entirely like us. When the archaeologists first uncovered them, they were puzzled. These remains did not belong to the bronze casting artisans or the kings in embroidered robes. They were far older, older by tens of thousands of years. The skulls were thicker, the brows more pronounced, the shape of the bones more rugged, more primitive. They belonged not to Homo sapiens, but to Homo erectus, the ancient ones who had wandered this land before memory was born. The discovery was startling enough, but what unsettled the researchers most was not simply that Homo erectus had lived here, it was the marks on the bones. Strange carvings, unnatural etchings, tiny punctures that seemed deliberate. Some of the bones bore signs of fire, not the accidental burns of a campfire, but careful, controlled scorching. Others had been arranged in patterns as if placed with intention, and in certain fragments under the microscope there were traces of minerals and residues that did not match the surrounding soil, as if the bones had been exposed to substances unknown to the earth around them. To the scientific eye, these were anomalies to be catalogued, debated, explained. But to the imagination, to the whisper of myth that runs beneath the surface of all human thought, they were something more. They were evidence of touch from beyond. The old legends of Sanxingdui had always spoken of visitors, beings with golden eyes, with masks of light, who descended from the heavens and taught fire, vision, order. The Shu had cast them in bronze, immortalized them in masks with bulging eyes, erected the bronze tree as a bridge between their world and the sky. But what if the legends were older than Sanxingdui? What if they stretched back not just centuries, but tens of thousands of years? What if the visitors had not come to kings and priests, but to the ancestors of humanity itself? The bones whispered this possibility.
Imagine it, a small band of Homo erectus huddled in the valley, their fires flickering weakly, their tools little more than stones. The night sky above them vast, incomprehensible, and then suddenly light, not firelight, not moonlight, but something else, descending from the heavens, flooding the valley with brilliance. From it emerged beings taller, stranger, with faces unlike theirs, with eyes that glowed. To the Homo erectus, these figures would have seemed like gods, beings of impossible power. And perhaps they were.
What did the visitors do? Did they observe? Did they experiment? Did they teach? The marks on the bones seemed to suggest all three. Some bones bore signs of healing, as though touched by hands that understood more than primitive medicine. Others bore signs of deliberate cutting, not the rough slashes of butchery, but fine, careful incisions, as if the body itself was being studied. And still others bore marks that no one could yet explain, tiny circular punctures that seemed almost mechanical. To the descendants of Homo erectus, these stories became myth. To the Shu, they were inherited memory, carried in the blood, passed down through countless generations, until they were no longer history, but legend. And when the Shu cast their masks and raised their bronze tree, they were not inventing new gods. They were remembering old ones, remembering the visitors who had walked with their ancestors in the dawn of time. But memory is not always clear. What begins as history becomes shadow, becomes story, becomes worship. The Shu no longer knew what the visitors had done, only that they had been there. And so they shaped them into gods, pleading for their return, burning treasures in their honor. But beneath that longing lay something darker, because the bones did not only whisper of guidance, they whispered of manipulation. What if the visitors had not simply taught Homo erectus? What if they had shaped them? What if they had reached into the fabric of life itself, altering, experimenting, nudging evolution along paths it might not otherwise have taken? Could it be that Homo sapiens, we, are not entirely natural, that we are the legacy of hands, not of this earth? The thought is unsettling, yet the bones whisper it still.
And when the people of Sanxingdui built their city, when they cast their masks, when they buried their treasures, perhaps some part of them still remembered, not clearly, not consciously, but deep in the marrow of their being, that they were shaped by powers greater than themselves. That the bulging eyes on the masks were not imagination, but memory of those first faces that looked upon them. That the bronze tree was not a symbol, but a reconstruction of something their ancestors had once seen. The whisper of bones is faint, but it lingers. It suggests that Sanxingdui's greatness was not an isolated miracle, not simply the genius of a people who flourished by rivers and mountains. It was part of a larger story, a story that began before Sanxingdui, before Shu, before us. A story of contact, of influence, of beings who walked beside humanity in its infancy and then vanished, leaving only silence and longing. Archaeologists, of course, do not speak in such terms. They speak of stratigraphy, of cultural layers, of migration and development. But outside the trenches, in the quiet of night, one cannot help but wonder. If the bones whisper, are we listening? If the masks stare, are we seeing? If the pits burn, are we remembering? And perhaps that is why the discovery of Sanxingdui unsettles so many even now, because it is not just an archaeological site, it is a mirror held up to us, reflecting not only who the Shu were, but who we are, and the reflection is uncanny. For in the wide eyes of the masks, in the strange branches of the bronze tree, in the whisper of bones beneath the soil, we glimpse the possibility that we are not alone, that we have never been alone. The bones do not shout, they do not declare, they whisper, softly, persistently, as if urging us to lean closer, to listen harder, to question deeper. And in that whisper lies both wonder and dread. For if we are the legacy of visitors, what does that make us? Children of gods, experiments of strangers, or simply inheritors of a story too vast to fully understand? Sanxingdui collapsed, its people vanished, its treasures buried. But the bones beneath tell a story that stretches beyond kingdoms, beyond time. They remind us that the past is not silent. It murmurs through soil, through stone, through the marrow of who we are. And sometimes, if we are quiet enough, if we are willing to hear, the bones still whisper of a dawn when the sky touched the earth and humanity was forever changed. The silence of Sanxingdui was not unique. Across the world, in valleys and deserts, on mountain peaks and riverbanks, other peoples built their monuments, told their stories, lifted their eyes to the sky, and waited. And if one listens closely, if one compares mask to mask, myth to myth, symbol to symbol, an unsettling pattern emerges as though the earth itself was stitched together by a single hidden thread. In Mesopotamia, far from the Sichuan basin, the Sumerians carved their stories into clay tablets. They told of the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens to shape humankind, to teach them agriculture, to give them kingship. The tablets describe gifts of knowledge too sudden, too vast for ordinary invention, writing, irrigation, law. And the faces of the Anunnaki, with their great eyes and strange crowns, are not so different from the staring masks of Sanxingdui. Different lands, different tongues, but the same echo. In Egypt, the desert shimmered with pyramids so immense that even now they defy easy explanation. The Egyptians said their gods had come from the stars, from Orion and Sirius, teaching them the arts of architecture, medicine, and timekeeping. Their statues show eyes elongated, gazes fixed not on the earth but on eternity. The pharaohs wore masks of gold, not unlike the golden-faced figures of Sanxingdui, as if to cloak themselves in the likeness of beings beyond human. Across the ocean, in the Americas, the Maya and the Olmec built temples aligned with the heavens, their carvings depicting gods descending on serpents of fire. They too spoke of visitors who came from above, who gave knowledge, who demanded sacrifice. Their colossal heads, carved from stone, stare with unblinking eyes that feel eerily familiar, as though distant cousins of the Sanxingdui bronzes. In India, the Vedas sang of the Devas and Asuras, beings who battled across the skies in flying chariots called vimanas. They spoke of weapons so powerful they could level cities in a flash of fire. The hymns described knowledge gifted and taken, alliances made and broken. Once again, the echo is there, the presence of higher powers walking among mortals, shaping them, leaving behind only memory. Even in the frozen north, the Norse told of the Aesir and Vanir, sky beings who fought and ruled, who mingled with humankind. Their gods had eyes that saw far, that pierced the veil of worlds, much like the bulging eyes of Kangkong, the legendary first king of Shu. Everywhere one looks, the echo repeats, golden masks, trees of life, visitors from the sky. Knowledge gifted suddenly, catastrophes following, silence after, different names, different symbols, but the pattern is unmistakable. Could it be coincidence? Could it be that human imagination, wherever it blooms, always paints the same pictures? Gods from the sky, bridges between worlds, treasures burned for unseen powers? Perhaps. But the bones beneath Sanxingdui, with their strange marks, whisper otherwise. They whisper that the echoes are not coincidence, but memory. That humanity, across its scattered tribes and kingdoms, was touched by the same hands, guided by the same visitors, shaped by the same unknown power. And if that is true, then Sanxingdui was not an anomaly. It was a node in a vast web, a single spark in a network of fires that flared across the ancient world. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the Maya, the Olmec, the Norse, the Shu, all branches of the same hidden tree, all reaching upward, all waiting for the return of the visitors. But the echoes share something else as well, silence. The Anunnaki left. The Egyptian gods receded. The Maya gods demanded sacrifice but withdrew. The Vedic Devas battled in the skies and vanished. The Norse gods faded into myth. And in Sanxingdui the pits burned, the masks were buried, the kingdom fell silent. Everywhere the pattern is the same, a sudden flowering of knowledge, a burst of brilliance, and then disappearance, collapse, abandonment. As though the visitors had moved from one place to the next, sowing seeds, harvesting, and then departing. Why? That is the question that haunts the echoes. Why give knowledge only to take it away? Why appear in brilliance only to vanish into silence? Were the visitors caretakers, nudging humanity along like gardeners tending fragile shoots? Or were they something colder, experimenting, testing, shaping, and then leaving once the test was done? The bones whisper, but they do not answer. The masks stare, but they do not explain. Perhaps the truth lies in the catastrophes, floods, droughts, earthquakes, wars. So many ancient collapses followed the same rhythm. Could it be that the visitors brought not only knowledge but disruption, that their presence strained the balance of the world, that their departure left kingdoms unstable, vulnerable? Or perhaps the catastrophes were not natural at all, but the deliberate severing of contact, a cleansing of evidence, a burning away of footprints. Sanxingdui's burning pits fit the pattern, the treasures destroyed, the masks buried, the bronze tree abandoned, all mirrors of rituals found elsewhere. In Mesopotamia, temples burned. In Mesoamerica, idols smashed. In Egypt, tombs sealed. Everywhere, a sudden attempt to cover, to erase, to bury. As though humanity was not only abandoned, but compelled, perhaps even instructed, to hide the traces of what had been. And yet, they could not bury it completely. The echoes remained, the myths endured, the masks waited beneath the soil, the pyramids still pierced the desert sky. The Vedas were sung, the sagas told, the temples stood. Across the world, the evidence lingered like scattered fragments of a shattered mirror. And when pieced together, the reflection is unmistakable. Humanity has been touched, guided, haunted, and then left to wonder. Sanxingdui was not alone. It was part of a chorus that sang the same song in different tongues, a song of visitors, of gifts, of loss. And perhaps if we listen closely enough, we can hear the rhythm that binds them all. For the echoes are not just in stone and bronze, not just in myths and bones. They are in us, in the sudden leap of our species from fire to tool, from tool to city, from city to kingdom, in the way we look at the stars and feel both awe and longing, in the way we tell stories of gods and visitors again and again, no matter where we are born. The echoes are written into our very blood, and perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, that we, humanity, are the living echo, that we are the memory of the visitors, walking, breathing, dreaming, that when we build, when we write, when we lift our eyes to the sky, we are not only ourselves, but the continuation of a story that began long before. Sanxingdui's silence is part of that story. Mesopotamia's tablets, Egypt's pyramids, Mesoamerica's temples, India's hymns, the Norse sagas, all part of the same story. Echoes across the world, calling to one another, waiting to be pieced together. And if the echoes are real, then perhaps the visitors are not gone. Perhaps they never truly left. Perhaps they are still listening, still watching, still waiting. The silence may not be absence, it may be pause. A pause long enough for humanity to grow, to stumble, to rise on its own. A pause before the story resumes. The echoes are everywhere. The question is, are we ready to hear them? For centuries after Sanxingdui fell silent, the land of Shu was wrapped in fog and forgetting. The rivers still flowed, the mountains still guarded the valley, and people continued to live and farm and worship. But the great city was gone, its masks buried, its treasures broken, its bronze tree shattered. The memory of its greatness slipped from human lips, dissolving into fragments of legend. Yet the sky remembered. In the chronicles of later dynasties, there are strange records, small notes, scrawled in bamboo strips and silk scrolls, that speak of things which cannot be explained. They tell of nights when the sky blazed with fire, not of lightning nor stars, but of flames that moved against the wind, danced in silence, hovered above mountains, and vanished without sound. The chroniclers, bound by duty to record, called them sky fires. Some said they were omens, some said they were dragons, some said they were the anger of heaven. But others, older and quieter, whispered that the sky fires were not new, that they had been seen before, in the days when the Shu kings wore masks of bronze and built trees of light. One record from the Han dynasty tells of a golden face that appeared above the Min River, a glowing visage that hung in the air for hours before dissolving into sparks. Another from the Three Kingdoms era describes great eyes in the clouds that shone with unearthly brightness, terrifying soldiers into abandoning their camp. In the Tang dynasty, poets wrote of heavenly lanterns that drifted across the night, too slow to be meteors, too silent to be storms. The people stared upward, fearful, reverent, unsure whether to bow or to run. And in the villages near where Sanxingdui once stood, the old people said something different. They said, "The ancestors have returned." For them, the sky fires were not omens nor dragons. They were memories made real again. The masks in the pits with their bulging eyes had stared upward for a reason. The bronze tree with its branches reaching to the heavens had been a map, a bridge, a beacon. The fires in the sky were the answer, the sign that the visitors had not gone forever, that their watching eyes still lingered above the earth. But why did they return in silence? If the visitors meant to guide humanity, why not descend again? Why only fire without voice, eyes without words? Why only to terrify soldiers, to mystify peasants, to confuse poets? Why no new gifts, no new teachings, no new bridges between heaven and earth? Perhaps the visitors had changed. Perhaps they no longer wished to walk among humans, but only to watch from afar. Perhaps they had seen what became of Sanxingdui, its collapse, its burning, its silence, and decided that direct contact brought only ruin. Or perhaps their purpose had always been something else, something colder. The sky fires, then, were not gifts nor omens, but reminders. We are here. We have always been here. You cannot escape our gaze. The chronicles grew more scattered as dynasties rose and fell, but the stories never ceased. Always, somewhere, someone saw the sky blaze in ways it should not. In the Song dynasty, farmers reported a silver tree of light rising above the horizon, eerily similar to the bronze tree buried in Sanxingdui's pit. In the Ming dynasty, a general described iron birds that moved without wings, silent yet swift. By the Qing dynasty, the sky fires had become so common in rumor that officials banned peasants from speaking of them, calling it dangerous superstition. But even bans cannot silence the sky. And then, in the 20th century, when archaeologists uncovered the pits of Sanxingdui, the whispers grew louder. For when the masks were lifted from the soil, when the bronze tree was pieced back together, when the golden faces were shown again to the world, something strange happened. Reports of lights in the skies over Sichuan surged. Farmers, pilots, villagers, they all spoke of glowing orbs, hovering discs, shapes of fire that pulsed and darted and vanished. To officials, these were dismissed as mistakes, illusions, weather. To scientists, they were dismissed as misidentified meteors or experimental aircraft. But to those who remembered the legends, they were proof. Proof that the visitors had returned to watch once more, drawn by the unearthing of the treasures they had once inspired. The archaeologists laughed at such talk, but not always comfortably, for many of them had seen the masks up close, had felt the weight of their gaze. And in the silence of their work, some admitted to one another that the eyes did not feel like art. They felt like memory, like replicas of something that had been seen. And when they heard of lights above the excavation site, they did not always dismiss it so quickly. The pattern was too clear. Sanxingdui had risen in brilliance, as though touched by fire from the sky. Then it had collapsed, its treasures burned, its memory erased. And now, when those treasures were uncovered, the sky fires returned. The story was repeating itself, echoing forward in time. But to what end? That question lingers like smoke. Were the visitors waiting for humanity to rediscover its past before making themselves known again? Were they testing us, watching to see what we would do with the fragments we unearthed? Or were they simply circling back, drawn to the same valley, the same soil, the same bones they had touched long ago? In the quiet hours, when the museums are closed and the pits are covered again, some say you can still feel it in Sanxingdui. A pressure in the air, a hum beneath the ground, as though the soil itself remembers. And when night falls and the fog rolls across the plain, sometimes lights appear, faint, flickering, but undeniable. Sky fires as old as myth, as new as tomorrow. The story is not finished. The silence of Sanxingdui was not the end, but a pause. The return of the sky fires is the beginning of something else. What that something is, gift, punishment, revelation, or reckoning, no one yet knows. But the fires wait, and the masks stare, and the bones whisper. And we, children of their legacy, can only look upward and wonder. Are they coming back for us? The story of Sanxingdui had always been one of fragments, shattered bronzes, broken tusks, burned treasures, buried masks, pieces of something immense, something greater than a single kingdom, left for us to puzzle over. Yet what if all these fragments were themselves only part of a larger mask? A mask that humanity has been wearing without knowing, hiding the truth of its own face. The last mask is not made of bronze or gold. It is not buried in pits or displayed in museums. The last mask is us. Think of it. Across the world, echoes whisper of visitors, of sky fires, of knowledge given and taken. Sanxingdui was one spark in that long chain. The bronze tree, with its branches reaching upward, was more than art. It was a memory of a link between earth and sky. The wide-eyed masks were more than symbols. They were faces recalled from ancestral encounters with beings who stood taller, saw farther, understood deeper. The bones beneath the soil carried marks of experiments, of manipulation, of contact. And when the treasures were unearthed in modern times, the sky fires returned, as if drawn by recognition. The pattern is too sharp to ignore. The truth whispers through it. Humanity is not alone and never has been. Homo erectus was not merely a creature stumbling with stones in the dark. They were touched, changed, nudged forward by hands not of this earth. They became the ancestors not only of Homo sapiens, but of a species with memory. Memory of gods, memory of visitors, memory of faces too large, eyes too wide, lights too bright. That memory passed into myth, into worship, into art. The Shu carved it into bronze, the Sumerians pressed it into clay, the Egyptians gilded it in gold, and we today carve it into science fiction, into stories, into speculation. The visitors never left us. They live in our blood, in the leaps of our evolution, in the hungers of our imagination. They shaped us and then let us believe we were alone. But the sky fires betray their presence still, silent watchers above our heads. And Sanxingdui, our Sanxingdui, was their great experiment, a city raised in brilliance, infused with art that seemed alien in its precision and strangeness, masks staring outward as though trying to see beyond the veil, trees cast in bronze as though attempting to rebuild what had once connected worlds, treasures burned and buried as though erasing what could not yet be revealed. Its collapse was not failure, it was design. The visitors had given and then taken, as they always did. A cycle repeated across the earth. But the last mask remains. Humanity wears it still, pretending not to see, pretending that our myths are fantasies, that our memories are inventions, that our sky is empty. Yet the eyes of the mask bulge outward, refusing to let us forget. If the mask is us, then to remove it is dangerous, for what lies beneath may be too much to bear. Perhaps that is why the visitors let the fragments scatter, why they let kingdoms rise and fall, why they burn evidence before leaving. To reveal the whole face too soon would shatter us. So they give us pieces, echoes, glimpses, just enough to stir wonder, just enough to prepare, but never the whole truth. Not yet. And what of the bones? The bones say we are not only their students, but their work. That our intelligence, our sudden leaps, our restless creativity, these are not accidents. They are inheritances. We are the children of the visitors, shaped by them as much as by earth and sun. The bones are not silent. They hum with this legacy. Sanxingdui is the reminder, the flare in the fog. Its masks, unearthed in our age, arrive not as relics of a forgotten culture, but as signals. Signals that the cycle may be turning again. The visitors are watching. The sky fires return. The old faces look upon us through bronze eyes.
And what then?
This is the dread and wonder of the last mask, that it may soon slip, and we may be forced to confront what lies beneath. Perhaps the visitors will reveal themselves again, not in fragments, but in full. Perhaps they will demand something, loyalty, obedience, sacrifice. Or perhaps they will offer what they once offered, knowledge, vision, power beyond imagining. But with gifts come consequences, as Sanxingdui learned, as Sumer and Egypt and Maya learned. Are we ready now in a way they were not? Maybe that is why the treasures were buried. Maybe that is why the sky fires hover but do not land. The visitors wait until humanity can look at itself without the mask, until we can face the truth of our own making without collapsing into ruin. The last mask, then, is not only us, it is our readiness. When we are ready to see, the mask will fall. Until then, the story continues. The bones whisper. The masks stare. The sky fires burn. And in the fog of Sichuan, where Sanxingdui once shone, the earth dreams of the day when the tree will grow again, when the branches will reach upward, when the visitors will descend once more. If you stand there at dusk among the fields, you might feel it, the hush, the waiting, and if the fog parts just right, you might see a glimmer in the sky, a fire moving against the wind, pausing, watching, not a star, not a plane, but something older. the same eyes that looked upon Homo erectus in the dawn, that watched Sanxingdui burn its treasures, that hover now above us still. The last mask is already slipping. The question is not whether they will return. The question is whether we are ready when they do. And so the story ends where it began, with silence. The silence of Sanxingdui, the silence of the bones, the silence between stars. But silence is not absence. Silence is waiting. Silence is the pause before the voice speaks again. And when it does, may we have the courage to listen. And so, the silence of Sanxingdui continues. The masks stare with eyes that seem to watch us even now. The bronze tree stretches its branches toward a sky that has never stopped burning with hidden lights, and the bones beneath the earth still whisper of a time when humanity may not have been alone. We have walked together through echoes that span thousands of years, through myths of sky fires, visitors of impossible power, and the haunting thought that our story as humans began not just with fire and stone, but with guidance from something far beyond ourselves. Perhaps we are the last mask, wearing borrowed faces until the truth is ready to be seen. Perhaps the silence is only waiting, and the sky fires are the reminder that one day the visitors will return. Until that day, we keep wondering, we keep telling these stories. And in telling them, we remember that mystery is not something to fear, it is a lantern we carry into the dark, lighting the path ahead. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May the silence of Sanxingdui remind you that every ending is only a pause, and every pause may yet hold the beginning of a greater story.